I have some sketches I'd like to show you. This is what the Fae looked like.
Nice rendition. You always could draw, Dickie.
Here's another one.
Huh.
And then there's this.
What the hell is that?
I don't know. It's just what I see.
What do you mean, it's just what you see?
It's all in my head. I mean, that's what I gotta tell you. It's how they talk to me, the Fae. But no, not really talk. I can't call it that. It's part of how they communicate to me.
Tell me about it, Dickie.
I experimented with the thing, the tuner. The Fae left for me, and I experimented with it for 3 weeks. They left me alone with it. Suspended their visits. It was a good strategy of theirs. By the time they returned, I felt ready. Receptive.
What do you mean, you felt receptive?
I don't know. I can't think of any better word to describe what I was feeling. It was a very foreign experience. The feelings within me came from the Fae. They weren't really earthly. One day I just knew that I was ready. I was ready for what the Fae had to say to me. On that same day, I heard their distinctive knock at my door again. I answered, and there they were, as usual, standing there waiting. They were waiting for me to let them in. They walked over to my couch, sat down for the first chat. I took a deep breath and sat down to face them.
What was it like?
Absolutely excruciating. Excruciating. I almost preferred the physical pain of the tuner. In the amount and intensity of information crammed into my brain during that initial split second of contact with the Fae was overwhelming. My consciousness was filled to the brim. I was completely lost to it. There was no room for my own thoughts. Everything was in such a whirl that I started to feel nauseous. And 10 minutes later, I mean, after 10 minutes, I couldn't take it. I clutched my head and began crying. The Fae immediately cut off their mental contact with me and left. The last one out retrieved the tuner, resting on my table on its way out.
What did you do?
I kept crying. I had failed. I had failed miserably. Here was mankind's first opportunity to communicate with an alien race, and I couldn't hack it. Would they ever return? Would they believe me incapable of ever understanding them?
It's a bit overdramatic, Dickie.
Fuck you.
Dickie?
They came back the next week. But this time, 2 of the Fae remained standing and only one sat on the couch. When it began again, I didn't think I was going to be able to take it. The initial seconds of their mental contact felt nearly as intense as the first, but then I realized it was different somehow, slower. I was actually able to focus on a few of the torrent of images that were coursing through my mind. I saw the Earth as it would look from outer space. I mean, there were other Fae, lots of them. Sometimes I saw scenes that were not of this Earth. Plants of impossible colors, red skies, violet skies. This time I held out for half an hour. During the next 2 months, the Fae increased the frequency of their visits to 3 times a week. I don't think I could have borne any more. The thought processes of the Fae are completely foreign to ours. Learning their mode of communication was like expecting a fish to understand how to drive a car.
A fish.
Let me continue. There's just no common point of reference. It was only through the conditioning afforded to me through the experience with the tuna rod that I was beginning to make sense of things. Even then, it took extraordinary mental efforts to begin to make any progress. Trying to make sense of it all was like standing on a pier, watching afternoon sunlight glint off each tiny wavelet, and each temporal flash of sunlight held the key to understand what the Phi were trying to communicate to me. Only that flash lasted an instant and was replaced by a new reflection of sunlight, meaning something completely different.
Whoa. Pretty complex analogy, Dickie.
They'll get it, Alice. They'll get it.
Okay.
After 2 months, their tutoring efforts began to pay off. I began to understand what they were trying to communicate to me. My initial breakthrough in my communications to them was my realization that they possessed no language. Their communication is process-based. Knowledge is passed on through a series of understandings. It's like remembering what someone has told you 10 minutes after holding a conversation with them. And the images are laid over those understandings. The trick is to juxtapose and balance the understandings with their accompanying images. And each understanding I received was really quite simple. What I figured out was that their thinking was three-dimensional, while ours is linear. I might receive a number of their projected understandings and images all at the same time. Each message was quite simple, but together it was all a jumble. I just had to learn to isolate and juxtapose them over each other and match them together in a fashion that made sense to me. Multitasking is a myth. I mean, the human brain can only really handle one task at a time. It's through the process of these mental gymnastics that I began to discover their meanings. My initial attempts were laborious, but eventually I started to get the knack for it.
Well?
Huh?
What did they have to say?
Not much, initially. Mostly the Phi concentrated on just tutoring me in the forms and modes of their communications. Much like you learn the grammar of a foreign language in a language class. Only, of course, the Phi have no language. My first understandings were nothing I didn't already know. They told me I was a man living alone in an isolated environment. They were the Phi. They came from a solar system 3/4 across the galaxy from us.
Oh, you already knew that about them?
Well, I knew they were from outer space. It doesn't really matter where, does it? Also, they told me that they'd been observing me for quite a while, and they noticed that I rarely had visitors, except for the nuisance of a few of those damn lost javelina hunters.
They feel the same way about the javelina hunters.
Listen, will you just let me...
All right. Hey, what about that alien writing looking shit you just showed me?
Yes, well, the Phi do have graphic representations of their communications, but it's all utterly untranslatable. No one symbol is ever exactly like another. It's true, their forms do seem to possess some thematic similarities to each other, but that's deceiving. Written language is a system of symbols representing ideas or phonetic segments of an oral language. For the Phi, each mark and form key into their notion of the balance between understandings and images. Nothing really complex is ever related through their writings. Mostly it's all just labels and instructions. They've been observing us for a long time. There are thousands of Phi currently in orbit around the Earth or within our atmosphere.
Why are they here?
Yes, why? That's the most fascinating aspect of the Phi. The reason they're here. But let me get back to that later.
Wait a minute. It seems like the whole reason the Phi would come here in the first place would be to get the
Dick,
people-
Alice! Ugh! Alice, I have carefully selected and prioritized topics to discuss during these sessions that will educate the general public on everything that is necessary to...
Okay. Skip the speech. I'm sure you'll get to it.
Being schooled by the Phi is a remarkable experience. I remembered everything. I mean, I experienced 100% retention of everything I learned. Somehow, the tuning enabled me to absorb everything I learned from them. As their communications to me became more complex, I experienced an exponential ability to absorb it all. There's still so much to learn, though. Even now, I'm only able to absorb their thoughts on a very rudimentary level. There may be dimensions of Phi communications that humans will never be able to see or to access. Unfortunately, conversation between the Phi and myself was one way. I could understand them, but there was nothing I could do to make them understand me. I was in effect mute to them.
You're not going to get to why they're here today, are you?
I thought I made that clear, Alice.
Okay, but this
Alice!
Okay, fine.